Hello, everybody. This is Barbara Gottlieb, PSR's Director for Environment and Health, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar today, Messaging on the Climate Emergency. Thanks for joining us. I think we're all here today because we're deeply concerned about climate change. We recognize that it poses a health emergency, but we're challenged by the difficulty of telling people about, just how threatening, just how frightening it is. And in fact, we're right to be frightened. Scientific reports tell us that climate change is worsening. The world has not succeeded in bringing down greenhouse gas emissions, and we have only a few decades to take sweeping and unprecedented actions to slash our climate pollution and begin pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. In case we missed that message, the UN just yesterday released its 6th Global Environment Outlook report. It said, and I quote, "Time is running out to prevent the irreversible and dangerous impacts of climate change." You know that already, but many people don't. And many of them seem to be resistant to hearing this daunting news. So how do we talk to them in ways that they can hear? Today's presentation will give us some very specific advice on that. Our guest speaker is Meighen Speiser, the newly named Executive Director of ecoAmerica. Congratulations, Meighen, on your new appointment as Executive Director. She has helped the organization achieve its mission since 2008. Before joining ecoAmerica, Meighen was the brand director for RED to end AIDS in Africa, working with all partners on their RED products and messages. Meighen spent the first decade plus of her career in the corporate world, leading brand marketing for Barbie at Mattel, American Express, and Robertson Stephens Investment Bank. Meighen lives in San Francisco with her husband and 2 children to inspire her to end climate change and create a toxics-free world for all. Joining her on this webinar is her colleague Rebecca Rear, Senior Manager for Climate for Health. So before we get started, just a few quick logistical points. All webinar attendees will be on mute during the entire presentation. If you have questions for our speakers, please type them into the questions box in the dock on the right-hand side of your screen. In the interest of time, I'll read them out and our guests will respond. Now, I say in the interest of time because we're going to throw a lot of content at you today. ecoAmerica's communications guidance is based on detailed research findings, and we thought it was important for you to see some of that underlying research. Now, you don't have to memorize it. Today's webinar is being recorded. It will be posted online, so you can review the contents later at your leisure. But in addition, much of the information is available on the ecoAmerica website, and Meighen has promised she'll share the URL with us. After Meighen presents ecoAmerica's recent research findings, she will then present the specific concrete advice on how to speak to people about climate change and orient them towards taking positive action. Once again, some of that guidance is pretty detailed, and so once again, you'll be able to review it online afterwards and also find much of it on the ecoAmerica website. So without further ado, I'm delighted to turn the program over to Rebecca Rear and Meighen Speiser.
Great, thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you to everyone on the line for joining us today. As Barbara mentioned, my name is Rebecca Rear, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for Climate for Health at ecoAmerica. I just wanted to take a moment to thank PSR for hosting this important webinar and for being such wonderful partners in our work to motivate and activate health professionals on climate change. I look forward to hearing more from you towards the end of the call during Q&A and continuing to work together. Over to you, Meighen.
Thanks, Rebecca, and good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for those on the East Coast. I'm going to throw a bunch of information at your way today, and as Barb said, take it in, but know that we have a lot to provide to you so that you can really dive deeper at your leisure. So I'll be speaking quite quickly, but don't hesitate to submit questions in the control panel if you have them. First, I just want to say, who is ecoAmerica? For those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit, and our mission is to build institutional leadership, public support, and political will for climate change. And we partner with national institutions to help them visibly lead on climate, engage their constituencies in relevant ways, such as through health, commit to 100% clean in their operations, and advocate for climate solutions. we offer a lot, not only to our partners, but to anyone who is trying to work to bring climate solutions forward. And all of that is grounded in research, which we turn into resources. We have communications guidance. We bring folks together in summits and forums to help share ideas and build momentum. And certainly we support our organizational leadership and sector-wide collaboration as well. So I encourage you, if you haven't already connected with Climate for Health, which is our health program, to do so. We have a wealth of resources available for free. As Barb mentioned, everything we do is grounded in our research. We don't guess at anything. We want to make sure that we know exactly what Americans think about climate change, how are they responding to it, what motivates them, how are they being impacted by it. We look at it from all different angles. Our focus is to start with people and to focus on Americans, and particularly those who are middle on the issue of climate, and to look at ways that we can move them towards climate change that are personally relevant and motivating to them. And all of our research is available for free on the ecoAmerica website and also through Climate for Health. You see the URL at the bottom of the screen there. And we encourage you to download it and use it. We ensure that we also give guidance on how to apply the research, because doing the research is one thing, applying it is where we really see mileage with our partners. So all of that is available for you for free. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about some context on where we are on climate change. We're going to share some findings we just released today on American climate perspectives and attitudes. We're then going to walk through the stepwise process to help you create your own authentic message on climate and health, and then overview some talking points. And certainly that will all be followed by a Q&A. So diving right into the context. Oops. Barb mentioned this at the beginning of the call. We learned in the fall from the UN, from National Climate Assessment, from the Lancet, from the World Health Organization, that climate change is not only our greatest national emergency, but it's also our greatest planetary emergency. For so many years, scientists were giving us the warnings that this was a crisis. And certainly the new news in the fall underscores that point. And you see some of the headlines on the screen here. It used to be that publications were hesitant to use the word crisis, but the data is so strong now that it's the word you see across the board. And so, certainly our greatest emergency and urgency is also our greatest opportunity. And I'm so glad that all of you are on this webinar today, because all of our voices are needed in this movement to help bring effective solutions forward. ecoAmerica did some research on the IPCC report to see, is anyone hearing about the report and what do they think about these findings? And part of it was to gauge whether or not they were seeing this as much of an emergency as it really truly is. Nearly half had seen the report, but regardless of whether they saw the report, they were getting certainly the contents of the report were very concerning to them. You saw that they were on board with solutions. We need to cut climate pollution by half by 2030 and eliminate it by 2050 to protect ourselves. You can see across the board, if we don't act now, people will live in areas with extreme heat, make the poor poorer. Across the board, across political affiliation, they're seeing these consequences and embracing them. And certainly there's trust of the report as well. We also looked at awareness and concern. So over the years, we do an annual survey in September, and you can see an uptick, a 10-point uptick from 71% to 81% of Americans are aware of the weather changes associated with climate change. Awareness is one component that we track, but concern is really where you see people spark motivation to do something about climate change. You can see concern is in the 73 percentile as of 2018. That is moving left to right, led by Democrats, but now over half of Republicans also are concerned, and that is a big uptick from 3 years ago. Independents are right in the middle. So if you look at that together, a majority of Americans are concerned about climate change. We also ask them, not only are they concerned, but do they think others around them are concerned? And you can see only 57% of them think that others around them are concerned. And so it's an important thing to note that people are feeling somewhat alone in their concern, and we need to let them know that they are not alone, that a majority of Americans are concerned, and that will give them permission to feel more comfortable talking about the issue. Specifically on Americans' thoughts on climate and health, we looked at sort of things around climate change, around pollutions and so forth. And Americans are worried about the environmental pollution on their family's health. Over 2/3 of them are. They're seeing longer and more severe allergy seasons. A high majority of Americans, 83%, agree that clean air is a personal right that should be available to all people. That's a very high majority. Not as many are recognizing the connection between climate change and human health, so that's where you all come in and helping them make that connection. But they are seeing 2/3 believe that health would improve if the U.S. took steps to prevent climate change. So here is our opportunity to focus on solutions and focus on the benefits. We also looked at some other key attitudes around energy, preparedness, and speaking out on climate change. And you can see here very high support, 89% support more wind and solar, with nearly 70% much more. 61% of Americans say that we need to produce less coal, which is a big jump since 2017. So good news on the clean energy, on the renewable energy, and also good news that folks want less dirty energy. On preparedness, preparedness is a concept that people can relate to no matter what political affiliation they have. 76% want their city or town to prepare, but only 35% say that their city, or 35% say their city is not doing anything on this issue. So that's a big delta, a big way from on a local, in a local perspective for folks to get involved. And you can see here a growing number of Americans believe it's important to speak out to friends, family, elected officials about climate change and feel empowered to do something about advancing climate solutions. So for those of you who are going to be engaging in this space, you have company, you have good company. As I noted before, 66% of Americans believe that our health would benefit if the U.S. took steps to prevent future climate change. Here's the numbers. I know it's a lot of numbers on the chart, but you can see here that it is across party lines that folks are seeing that it will help increase health. They also believe it will help the economy and jobs. So all of those numbers are in the sort of in the majority percentage at this point. But one that leads is your health. We also asked in another survey a lot of questions around climate change, and we thought, how can we get around this political divide? And we asked a question of, should Republicans and Democrats find ways to work together, to solve climate change? And vast majorities across political lines said yes. And so I think that this showing is a not so latent wish for us to stop debating the issue and just get to work, and for our policymakers to work together on the appropriate solutions. So 90% of all adults agree with this statement. What I'm going to share with you now is research we just released this morning. I'm just going to share a couple of top lines about it. What we did was take a look at the Green New Deal, which has been presented to Congress, and to say, name aside, let's look at the policies that make up that proposed solution and see where Americans, see how they're supporting it or not supporting it. And so what we found was we put forward to them several proposals that are part of the Green New Deal, though we didn't label it as such, but they are obviously proposals to reduce damage to our climate. And what we found was broad support across political lines, particularly for developing technologies that remove carbon pollution from the air, provide training for jobs and support communities as they transition to a new green economy, and also speeding up the transition to clean sources of energy like wind and solar. All of those enjoy high majority support with a great margin of support versus, favor versus oppose. Others that also garnered decent support was generating 100% of our nation's electricity from clean sources like wind and solar within the next 10 years. As you can see here too, something to note, and I know this is a hot button issue for our PSR folks, but in the policy proposal, it does talk about preserving nuclear plants which do not create carbon pollution, and to know that that did garner 63% support. Americans are less supportive of rapidly transitioning away from energy sources like oil, coal, and natural gas, which do create carbon pollution. And you can see here just real resistance to change. They like to be for something, not against something. So looking at the difference between speeding up the transition to clean energy versus generating 100% of our nation's energy from clean energy, you can see here that there's a fair amount of support for each. However, there's more intensity of support and higher levels of support in speeding up the transition to clean sources of energy like wind and solar. Again, folks want to get going and get it done. They're not so sure about the 100% in 10 years. And I would recommend that that's a follow-on message. Here it is broken down by political party. Of course, Democrats favor both in high majorities, as they tend to favor all climate solutions. However, they do also favor with higher intensity the speeding up of the transition to clean energy. Independents, similarly, you see the real delta here in the Republicans, who favor a majority, a mild majority favor speeding up the transition to clean energy. However, they're very split on the 100% in 10 years. And it really is something about 100%, 10 years, the numbers game, that I think we lose them on. So that wraps up what I'm going to share with you, from the latest data that we, like I said, just released today. And now I'm going to switch gears and talk about how do we now talk about that? How do we talk about what's going on in climate change, how it affects our health, and how do we share that information, inspire others to join you in leading on this issue? So I'm going to walk you through our Let's Talk Health and Climate. And really, this is a very top-line summary of it. You can download the Let's Talk Health and Climate report from climateforhealth.org, and we will send out all the links after this webinar so that you can have access to them. So what I'm about to share with you will help you in any kind of your communications, whether you're writing to your newspaper, giving a speech, having informal conversations, or even talking with elected officials or your colleagues about climate and health. What we've seen over the years is an evolution of messaging. Certainly our colleagues in the movement, raised the warning flags very early on and said this is a crisis, and they talked about it in crisis language. They talked about it as global warming and polar bears and ice caps, and that was very effective in getting a lot of activists engaged on this issue, and I want to thank them for all that they've done to keep pushing forward. However, a majority of Americans in particular don't resonate with that message. It feels too scary. It makes them put their hands up and push back. It's just too overwhelming and distant for them. In about 2008, we started talking about social benefits, jobs and opportunity and so forth. And that's fine, except it was a little bit weak in and of itself. What we know from our research today is that it's all about personal relevance. Americans need to see how it's impacting them personally. They need to see how solutions will benefit them personally. A little notes about what is personal relevance. It's about salient climate impacts, things they can see with their own eyes, linked to their daily lives, local. It's unambiguous solutions, solutions that solve it. It's protecting our health, our pocketbooks. It's about having agency and empowerment. We can do this. You can be part of the solution in our communities, in our careers, in our personal lives. And certainly it's about also the moral imperative, our responsibility to our children, our families, our communities. That's all components of personal relevance that we know resonate with, because we've tested it, resonate with Americans and are true. What I have up here on the screen is a successfully tested message about climate and health. We have this written in the report, like as I said, that you can download for Climate for Health. But just to kind of point out some of the topics that we cover. We talk about our family's health. It matters. We cite the American Lung Association in saying that toxic pollution is in the air we breathe and that is affecting nearly half of all Americans. We call for solutions. We talk about our kids and our seniors and how they're being impacted by climate change and sort of the effects of our changing climate. And then we transition into saying we can do something about this, that wind and solar are here, it's safe, and that it helps every breath we take be a healthy one. It talks about personal solutions like walking or biking and the co-benefits of the fitness and reduction of air pollution. And it ends with the ideas of we can make our cities more sustainable so that we can live our best lives and that we can care for our climate to care for our health. And so let's break that down. How do we get to that message? And certainly this is not something that we want cookie cutter that everybody says, but you can take parts of this. You can be informed by it. And it has a certain flow to it that I'm going to walk us through. How we see this message is that it opens a conversation and it actually opens people's minds to talking about climate change in a way that's non-threatening and that is inspiring to them. First, we did a lot of testing of specific words and phrases. I'm not going through all of this, but certainly I'll cover a couple of them. For instance, talking about global warming, climate crisis, climate change even are less effective than talking about damage to the climate, damage to our climate, our changing climate, because damage in particular implies that we can do something about it. It can be prevented. Certainly talking about the air we breathe, it's inclusive, it's visual. One of the things we recommend is really being visual with our language and really showing the benefits. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but certainly the last point on here is create healthy and safe communities that protect our families and children's health. Obviously, that's focusing on the positive, it's motivating, and it really connects personally to our families, children and families. We have in the back of our Let's Talk Health and Climate guide a series of talking points about how you can talk as a health professional about this issue, and certainly also responses to counterpoints that folks often put out there. So that I won't go through those, but those are there for you and hopefully will be helpful. And those are certainly generally on the issue. But now I'm going to walk us through the steps to creating your own authentic, effective message on this issue. And how we want you to think about this is in 3 buckets. The first bucket is, or the first phase is building rapport with your audience. And I'll walk through those steps. But remember, you are a human, you're speaking to humans, you need to have a connection with them. It's just social psychology that folks need to feel connected to you in order to build that trust and hear you. The second phase is inspiring and empowering. you talk about climate change, but you really focus on the solutions and how we can do something about it. And then the third bucket is really about strengthening your message. And certainly this is what you do in preparation for speaking or writing, but just tips to ensure that you are the most successful as you can be. So diving right in, the first step is to start with people and stay with people. Again, remember your humanity, and that folks are essentially emotional beings that want to trust you, and you need to build that trust with them. So you've got to show your audience you care about them. You start from their perspective. Do a little homework about your audience when you're speaking with them. Find out what they care about and what their top concerns are. And don't come out the gates talking about climate change. You're connecting with them personally. And this is really a bit of communications 101. When we say stay with people, it's really about remembering to return to your message that you're always talking about them and their concerns, and you thread that throughout your communication. The second point is to connect on common values. Here's where you demonstrate, and you've done your homework, you're bringing it forward, that you show that not only do you understand their priorities, but you point out where you have commonality. Because when you can show that you understand them and also that you share their values, they will feel more connected to you and be more connected to you. And certainly, everyone cares about their health. And as a health professional, you're very authentic in really caring about the health and connecting with them on that specific value. Here's a summary of common values that all Americans hold, which bodes well for you as health professionals. Family first. Everyone cares about their family. They care about their health. They want security not only for themselves and their families, but for us as a nation. They feel that we can do it. They have this American ethos of compassion, and we can do it, sort of that Rosie the Riveter kind of attitude. And if we can tap into that, fabulous. They also believe that we have personal rights to clean air, clean water, a clean environment, and very specifically in the personal rights framework, they feel very strongly about these topics, and so that is also a common value. And last but certainly not least, high majorities feel a moral responsibility to do something about climate for the sake of their children, their grandchildren, their families, and future generations. And so this moral responsibility framework and family framework is very strong as well. This next point is very important in that it is acknowledging the ambivalence of folks you're speaking to. People come to the table with different awareness levels of climate change, different levels of concern. They might have perspectives that are clouded by certain media agencies. And if we just acknowledge that there may be varying opinions or concerns in the room, we really help to bring people along with us. It shows that you respect their different perspectives, and we should respect their different perspectives. But we don't want to dwell here. It's really just acknowledging it and then moving forward. And an example is, we might not all agree on the cause for this recent, weather events, but we can agree that we can, basically do something about it for our families and neighbors. And so it's really helping to transition that respect and acknowledgement into sort of what we can do something about it. The next step is really where we make it real. So you can see we're building rapport, we're acknowledging ambivalence. Now we're really starting to talk about climate change. Here is where we sort of put it out there that climate change is impacting us, our families, and here's where we really want to focus on the local realities that people can see and feel, and making it very personally relevant. You'll also talk about it as a fact. It is happening. We don't want to get into arguing the science of it, and I know a lot of you are scientists, so please don't take offense, but Americans, for some reason, hear that word science and it's some sort of trigger for them to argue. And so we just need to present climate change as, and the impacts of climate change in particular, as factual, as real, and certainly talk about the health-related impacts. There's a wealth of information on health-related impacts, and I want to point out that the average American can handle 1 or 2 points of impact. But as we tested this with Americans, what we saw was any more than that was a little overwhelming to them. You know, we tested in focus groups, we tested in dial tests, which is where people dial up and down as they listen to the message, and we tested in a third time in surveys. And what we saw, particularly in the focus groups, were people's eyes getting wide as we listed more impacts, and they started putting their hands up and waving like, stop already. And so 1 or 2 really key impacts that are, you know, relevant to the audience are really what's going to be successful. Of course, if you're talking with your colleagues who are other health professionals, I know you all want a lot of information. You can share more of those health-related impacts, but very importantly with the public and even with policymakers, 1 or 2 key impacts is just fine. And the point here is not to dwell and to pivot quickly to solutions, which is the next step. So the next step is really important, and where we really should spend most of our time. If you look at the balance of time of communication, we should focus on these next few steps in emphasis. And one is solutions. Americans, if they're hearing anything on climate change, they're hearing the bad news, they really need to hear that there are solutions out there, and that there are benefits to those solutions. We need to do our homework and find out what the local solutions are that protect our family, talk about scale and efficiency, and a point here too is avoid talking about sacrifice. There's nothing that Americans hate more than to sacrifice something. They've worked very hard to achieve what they've achieved in life. They're trying to put food on the table for their families. The last thing they want to hear is that they have to give up anything. So what we want to talk about are positive things they can do to make their lives better. And so many of the things they can do personally do just that. And so I can't be more emphatic on the fact that this needs to be a positive message versus a sacrificial one. The next is inspire and empower. Doom and gloom does not motivate, so we need to talk about what the opportunities are, that we can make a difference, that you can lead personally, we can all lead personally. America can do this. This is where that can-do-it-tivism comes into play. You know, America has led so many of the industrial revolutions over the last, 100+ years, from cars to computers to internet to, cell phones, electric cars. We can do this too. We can lead on this issue, and it really is about us as Americans putting that pressure on our policymakers to make the right decisions for our country and for our children and families' health. Last but not least, and this section is focusing on personal benefit. As I mentioned before, the benefits of climate solutions, particularly on our health, are not as much part of the narrative as they need to be. This is a point of high personal relevance to Americans, so please do remember, if there's anything you talk about, if you just have 15 seconds to say anything to anyone, talk about the benefits to our health of clean energy in particular and other climate solutions. So across the board, the types of things that Americans see as personal benefits that are most relevant and also most relevant to climate solution, of course, is money in our pocketbooks, our wallets, our health, our family's health, children's health, and so forth, and our community. Is it going to make our community stronger, more resilient, a better place for us to raise our kids and for them to raise their own kids? Sorry, moving forward. In any communication, you want to have an ask. if you talk about climate change, you raise concern, you raise motivation, folks are ready for the next step. So what you want to do is turn the awareness into action and make an ask. It could be as easy as joining you in this movement, but certainly if you have a couple of ideas of how the person can or your audience can engage with climate, please provide them and make them accessible, make them aligned with what your audience can do and what they're interested in. So as you can see throughout these steps, communication on this issue takes a bit of preparation, a bit of homework on who you're speaking with. What we've done here is provide certainly some categories where you don't have to do as much homework and understanding the common values and the common benefits, but doing a bit of homework will make your communication even more successful. The last in the sequence here is that sequence matters. As you can see, I've numbered all the steps that I just walked you through. What we saw in our research and our testing is the order in which you talk about different aspects of climate change make a big difference on how the person responds to you as a speaker, as well as how motivated they are to do something about climate change when you're finished speaking. And so I can't emphasize enough that sequence matters. You've got to connect with them, make it about them, acknowledge ambivalence before you start talking about climate change. After you put the reality on the table, inspire and empower them. That all makes a big difference in bringing them along with you in the conversation. These next set, again, are the tips section. Describe, don't label. There's a lot of jargon that is associated with climate change, and where possible, really describe. So if you say clean energy, say like wind and solar, because Americans, when they hear jargon, they disconnect from it, and they also their trust level goes slightly down. So where possible, describe. Also make sure you all are trusted messengers, but in the case that you can cite American Lung Association, you can cite the Lancet report, the World Health Organization report. It makes folks feel more confident in you when you can cite one key fact from a trusted messenger. The next is ditch doom and gloom. Again, if Americans have heard anything about climate change, it's the bad news, and they have a very thin tolerance for bad news. So try to steer away from it. Okay to talk about, like I said, one or two impacts that are real, but really focus the majority of your communication on that inspiration and empowerment. Next is stories strengthen. Facts and numbers tend to numb Americans. Story strengthen. Tell a story about how you've engaged on climate. Tell a story about how community is leading on this issue. Those are the things that people remember. They remember stories, and they also feel more emotionally attached to stories. So find those positive stories, or even those that, where you can talk about children's asthma being exacerbated by the impacts of climate change, and people will remember. So more memorability, more emotional resonance, and it's really a strengthening of your message when you can bring a story into it. The next is stay above the fray. As I mentioned earlier, people love to argue about climate change. Don't get drawn into arguments. Speak from the mountaintops. If someone tries to argue about the science, or they want to argue about the solutions, be that voice of sort of the health and wealth and well-being of American people, and focus on your message. Don't get drawn into mano a mano, arguments with folks. Just return to your core message and move forward. Last but not least is message discipline is critical. This really is a message that we like to send out to the environmental movement writ large. If some of us are talking about one thing and some of us are talking about another thing, it's confusing to both the American people and to policymakers. And so it's really just being consistent with how we speak about the issue. So just to review, First phase is building rapport. Second phase is inspiring, empowering. And the third bucket really is about how to strengthen your message. Again, all of these steps and even articulation and visualization of these steps are in the Let's Talk Health and Climate Guide, which you can download from the Research and Resources section of climateforhealth.org. I also want to point out that as an organization, ecoAmerica issues talking points on a regular basis. We look at issues that are happening, issues in climate change that are topical, and we respond to them with talking points. We provide proactive talking points, and then just as we did in the guide, we also provide counterpoints, answers to counterpoints that are often sort of obviously pushback from the opposition. So all of that in our February talking points are available from climateforhealth.org in the resource section. And February in particular was about turning climate panic into progress, and really focusing on that inspiration and empowerment and getting people on board with doing something about climate change. I also wanted to just give a bit of recommendations of how to talk about the Green New Deal or the components of the Green New Deal. And here's what this is from the latest research that, again, we just released today. People are interested in speeding up the transition to clean energy sources. They feel like we can get this done. And so really leading with that is that all Americans or most Americans are supportive of speeding up the transition of clean energy, and we just want to get going and get it done is the right message. They also favor energy efficiency. They see it as a practical and pragmatic solution. Of course, it reduces pollution and it saves people money. We can also connect it with jobs. The more that we bring efficiency into our buildings, our homes, even our transportation systems, that provides people jobs. Americans don't know what the technologies are to remove carbon pollution from the atmosphere. And sitting here on this call, I couldn't list all of them myself, but they sure like it. And it really just shows that they support solutions, and they really are a fan of technological solutions. So talking about that has no downside. And again, as I've mentioned already on this call, making solutions personally relevant, particularly to the health and well-being of Americans, is a very salient way to talk about the need for climate solutions. Thinking about, those are relevant across party lines. For Democrats, additional message points is certainly being solutions oriented. Democrats support a wide variety of climate policies. It's really focusing on getting them to support solutions. They also really stand out as we are looking at how do we pay for solutions. They really favor making the wealthiest 1% pay for solutions. So recognize that that's there, versus a majority of Americans believe that making corporate polluters pay for solutions is also very high. Democrats and independents pop up on the populist 1% paying for solutions. For Republicans, they really resonate with transitioning to clean energy, and they also resonated with training, job training to help communities transition. There is our common ground right there. We all agree on those things. But to note, again, particularly for PSR members, that they really favor nuclear. They popped up highest in sort of favorability of maintaining and preserving nuclear power. So just know that that's there. Also, when responding to attacks, you're hearing very colorful oppositional attacks right now, the same kind of oppositional statements that they trotted out 10 years ago when Waxman-Markey was in Congress. And again, what I had said before resonates still. This is not, we don't want to go mano a mano. We don't want to respond directly to their attacks. We just focus on our message, first on values. Our family's health matters. Americans are concerned. Climate change is impacting our health and our communities. We have a responsibility to our children and grandchildren. You can then talk about the problem. the kind of folks that are opposing this have been paid by, oil and other fossil fuel interests. They're not representing the people. They are representing a handful of companies. And the solution is Americans want us all to work together on solutions, and certainly we want to transition to clean energy, protect air, water, and health, strengthen our communities, and we can get this done. And in summary, it's about not restating their lies or giving their lies more airtime. Just return to your message, and to remember always, to remember when you're speaking to someone, when you're communicating, that you are the advocate for the health and well-being of the American people. That is unassailable. You're speaking for the people. You care about their health and their well-being. And, if you keep remembering that is who you are, you will be fine and you'll be fabulous in your communications on climate and health. So that's it. I know I just pushed a lot of information your way, and again, as Barb said, we will be sending out that information and the links to all the research that we covered in a follow-up email. But now what we'd like to do is open it up for questions from you all. So Barb, I believe you're going to be fielding the questions. Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much, Meighen and Rebecca. That was really a powerhouse presentation. So much information and so useful and so practical. We do have a number of questions in the question queue, so we'll start with them. Again, it's the doc on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a place to type in questions. If there's still questions, go ahead. But we'll begin with the questions that were here. One of them is very simple. It says, "The slides, please, pretty please." So as Meighen just said, there will be material coming out to you, including a link to this webinar. One of the questions has to do with lifestyle. It says, if we are to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and reduce climate change, we'll need to change our lifestyle. How do we persuade people that we can do that?
Well, certainly the biggest bang for the buck is to use our voice to get our policymakers to make the kind of policies that will make our personal choices easier. Driving electric cars, having renewable energy that powers our homes. Those are the kind of changes that are going to make some of the biggest differences. And so I really would encourage you to encourage others to use their voice in that matter. Certainly the foods we eat and our other lifestyle habits make a difference as well. Putting LED lights in our homes not only is good for the climate, but it also saves us money in the long run. I would focus on those things that are beneficial to our pocketbooks and our well-being. A lot of folks talk about the kind of food we eat and the choices we make in our food. And certainly there's a lot of folks in the environmental movement that talk about reducing our meat consumption, particularly red meat. I would be judicious about who I talk to about that, and certainly position it as reducing versus eliminating. As you can see, or if you're following it in the news, one of the biggest things the opposition is picking up on is sort of this call to eliminate red meat from our diets, and saying that we're going to be taking away cows and so forth. Certainly we want to drastically reduce our red meat consumption. There's big impact on the environment, on our climate from red meat consumption, but again, not everyone's going to welcome that message. Instead, you might want to focus on eating more fish and eating more vegetables and the positive side of that message. I've tried to encourage some folks in the movement to, instead of meatless Mondays, bring back Fish Fridays, and that's just me talking as someone who was brought up in the Catholic faith tradition, Fish Fridays. But so I would focus on those kind of things. The easiest one for anyone to do is making their home more efficient. Minding their thermostats, again, the LED lighting, minding lighting. Not only does that, again, make them help the climate, but also reduces their monthly costs.
And if I could add to that, Meighen, some of the steps that you're talking about also have very distinct health co-benefits. So eating more fish, if it's replacing meat, has clear benefits in terms of reducing cholesterol. We didn't talk very much about things like transportation, but riding your bike, and to the drugstore rather than driving your car. These are things that, in particular, health professionals can say. Here's another question. Marielle Goldsmith asks, what about the word emergency? Mm-hmm. You'll notice that PSR uses that word, and she asks, is it helpful in conveying urgency, or is it counterproductive?
You know, we, in the message testing that we've done, when you talk about climate emergency, Democrats are with you on it. Independents are kind of in the middle, and Republicans aren't so sure. So it depends on your audience. That's why our first step is always to start with people and know your audience. It is motivating for those that sit on the left side of the aisle, and certainly our policymakers are starting to recognize that it actually is an emergency. And so it's really just sort of the right side of the aisle that is not quite on board with it yet. It is becoming more part of the national narrative. So it's not as taboo of a phrase as it might have been even a couple of years ago. It is our reality. And if you can speak about it as such, then I think you'll get more traction.
Thank you. Here's a question from Lori Byron. What about differences on common values between conservatives and liberals? Do you feel that both conservatives and liberals share the same common values, and would they be in the same order for both groups?
Yes, there was the slide that we showed earlier around family, health, security. Those top 5 or 6 values are resonant across political affiliation. So no matter whom you're speaking with, you can really recognize them. You could talk about them and say, here's what we have common ground, and really call them out as such. And so I would those are the 6 safe common ground values, and I'm not sure there's an order to them, but that we did put them in order, and I don't know if I can't, it would be hairline fracture difference between the different parties. I think they're in the right order.
Thank you. We have 2 questions actually in regard to the connection with the military. One of them says, first it says, a terrific presentation. This is from Mary Wynn Ashford. She says, do you make any connection with disarmament and protecting the environment? And there was also another, an earlier question talking about the fact that some of our bombers are major sources of greenhouse gases. Is this something you have ventured into testing?
We have not. Certainly, we do know that the U.S. military has looked at climate change from all angles, and not only do they see this as a security issue because of things like, being able to, take a ship through the Arctic Circle now, but also because of migration and so forth. They also see that clean energy is a security, is better. It makes them more secure and more effective in their missions out in the field. So a lot of them are using, solar and wind to power their operations out. Out in the field. But as far as taking a look at disarmament or their bombers, I'm not sure. I have spoken to a commanding officer at a base down in Southern California who's so proud that the base is going to be run 100% on clean energy in the next couple of years. and he wants us and others to hear his story. So I don't think they've gotten quite to the disarmament and the bombers yet, but I know that they're, as a, an agency, they're thinking about this in a lot of ways that are relevant to their operations.
Thank you. This is something of a comment, and it's followed at the end by a question. It's by Peter Sergienko. He says, on the issue of sacrifice and cost, I'm working in Oregon to help pass the Clean Energy Jobs Bill, an economy-wide, market-based cap-and-trade system that is a classic Republican solution. However, literally no Republican will vote for the bill as it stands. Thus, if the bill passes, it will almost certainly be on an entirely partisan basis. The reasons Republicans give for opposing the bill are mainly ideological, that is, government intervention is bad, and that the costs or, quote, sacrifices are simply unacceptable. There are unquestionably costs to the clean energy transition. However, the costs of inaction and the benefits of action far outweigh the short-term transition costs. So the question is, what messaging to Republicans works best given this dynamic? And he notes there are lots of job training and rural benefits built into the bill. Do we just emphasize those?
Yeah, I mean, as you saw from our recent research that, again, we just launched today, is focusing on the transition to clean energy, focusing on the jobs training component, focusing on the, on that we all want to do, what's morally right for the health and well-being of our families and children, and that this will make our communities stronger. If it gets down the line into a deeper conversation, sort of every shift in our society has taken investment, right? We didn't come up with, we didn't build a rocket to the moon without making some investment. We didn't, create our national highway system without investment, but that's inarguable that we need that. And so I would not only focus on the 2 points I said up front, but talking about investment and the return on that investment, I think is a more successful way to kind of shift the narrative.
Interesting, thank you. Here's a question from someone whose last name I'm afraid I'll mispronounce. It's G. perhaps Bosey, who says there are climate communication programs at Yale and George Mason University. Are your research conclusions about effective communication on climate consistent with what they have found?
Absolutely. We have a lot of alignment, almost 100% alignment with what they found, and we collaborate with them often and share data. So we're all good friends. We're all in alignment. They might argue we have a little too many steps in our stepwise process, but other than that, we are very much aligned in our approach, and it's, and so it's nice that all of our data align in that way.
Lori Costello says, I'm struck and saddened by the idea that Americans only care about what impacts them and their loved ones. Must I simply get over my disappointment in our self-centeredness? Yeah. Humans are, it's just human nature to understand what does this mean to me. And so I think that what we see is once they do understand how it impacts them, what we see is hopefully more hopeful for you, which is they really, they get on board with climate in a very broad way. So people just need their on-ramps, and it needs to be personal. But once they get it, and once they're convinced, once they see how it impacts them personally, they will see how they can help be part of the solution for all. And so just know that it's about bringing them along, and they'll be right with you once you do. Maynard Clark asks a very specific question. When you talk about concern, the levels of concern about climate change, do you disaggregate that by age or income? Absolutely. We have all of that data. We are going to release our national report sometime in the next month, and we can break it down by all kinds of different demographic categories: age, income, race, educational level,
areas of the country, whether they live urban or rural or in suburbia. So yes, we can splice and dice in that in a lot of different ways. And what we'll do is release what we call our top line report that has that information. And but if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us.
That's great, and I think your certainly your URL is on all of your slides. Is that the best way for people to be in touch with you?
Yes, we have our contact information on this last slide. If you want me to share my screen again, I can show that to you. Yes.
Why don't we do that? And that might be the perfect way for us to wrap up this webinar. It has been truly wonderful. Just a wealth of information that we know that lots of people are very eager to use. So thank you so much. And there we go. Meighen Speiser and Rebecca Rear from ecoAmerica. And I hope all of you will both go to their climateforhealth.org website and download these materials and stay tuned for the next PSR webinar. So thanks again and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.